when you're auditioning or when you're even practicing. Like if you're thinking about practicing for an audition and you go like, I probably shouldn't win. Like, are you gonna win? Like,
today's episode is a conversation around a really important topic. I'm just so glad that our guest is doing what she's doing and talking about this and bringing this to consciousness among both men and women. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contra-Bass Conversations, and we are chatting with Megan McDevitt about bass and gender, about women in the bass world, what that experience is like, and it's just such a valuable conversation. I know you're going to get so much out of this. Megan is an outstanding bass player and teacher and is one of the rising stars of the bass world for sure. She's developing this really interesting contemporary music performance career. She finished her doctorate at the University of Michigan. We talk about that. We talk about all kinds of topics. Really valuable conversation, and I just know you're going to love this. So let's get to it. Quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, A440, Upton Bass, and Robertson & Sons, and we'll hear a bit from them later. But let's start the episode now with this conversation with Megan McDevitt. Here we are, Megan McDevitt, and what do you, I have no idea where to start with this, but maybe what do you wish men in the bass world would know about the experience of women playing bass?
yeah, that's a great question. And the problem with that question is it takes forever to answer it.
Yes.
Because so it may take a little while to answer.
That's okay.
But basically, in order to kind of understand the way gender plays out in the bass world, you have to start to understand how gender is ubiquitous, like it's everywhere in society. And the way I kind of introduce it, so I gave this talk at the ISB convention last year in Ithaca, and I'm giving basically the same talk today. It's actually interesting because the whole like Me Too movement happened between
after
that
right?
talk, and I've given it once since then too, and it's sort of a little bit of a different vibe. Like people were really receptive to it at ISB. I think anyone who comes to that talk is going to be probably already pretty receptive to it. Maybe there were a few people that were just kind of checking it out to see what was going on, but yeah, it's interesting to like find ourselves in this time now, and to be talking about it a lot more. But anyway, so gender is everywhere. The way I talk about it in my lecture, using this sort of helpful sociological tool that I learned at the University of Michigan from Aaron Sick. Shout out to Professor Sick. So I break it down using this tool, and it's individual, interactional, and institutional modes. So basically that helps me, and it helps other people, I think, kind of understand all of the levels where gender plays a role. So the individual level is you as a person feel a certain way about yourself. You have preferences, you have feelings about who you are and how you identify. And, that could be like your favorite color or your favorite food or what you like to do in your free time. And much of that can be influenced by your gender. Even when, you talk to, or you go to like a classroom of preschool students or something, they're like making category. They love categories. Little brains love categories. So they want to say like, I'm a boy, you're a girl. That's like how I identify now. We use these toys and you use those toys, and, you have cooties and we don't. And, so it's already kind of started right at that young age. Or even like when somebody's pregnant, it's like the first thing you ask, right? There's like these gender reveal parties or whatever,
Right.
And so you're already like pigeonholed from before you're even born, for the most part. And anyway, your identity is wrapped up in that a lot. So just in yourself even. And of course, society influences your identity. And interactional is like the way people interact with each other. It's sort of self-explanatory. Right. Like, you know, how, you know, a man and a woman might speak to each other in a different way than two men or two women. Just like even in the physicality, in like, you know, it's common for men to interrupt women more often. I'm not saying everybody does this, but I'm saying like that is more common in general. So there's this, and women are more likely to exhibit like deference or do something called support work, which is like asking how your weekend was, or you know, asking questions about you, you know. So it's more likely for women to do that. So the way we interact, like dating conventions for heterosexual couples, you know, right. Are influenced by that. And then there's institutional, which is like, you know, public bathrooms are divided by gender. I hear like some universities are changing that now, which is kind of cool. But yeah, or the military, you know, any institution you could think of, education, government, even like family hierarchies count as institutions, and orchestras for sure, have like gendered components. Like, you know, military conscription is like an obvious example of a gendered component of society. So once you start kind of using those tools, I think, to understand how big of a role gender actually plays in our day-to-day life, you start to realize that it's not just like, oh, you're sexist, that person's not sexist. It's like, it's very hard to kind of separate gender from any other component of the way we interact with each other or our society. So that's like a whole like long sort of background.
It's a big topic. Yeah.
It's a big topic because, you know, we don't play bass in a vacuum. You know,
yeah, totally.
So once you kind of see that, you realize that there are these sort of norms we've put on like what it means to be a good bass player, for example. You know, there's this idea that you have to, you know, I've heard people say like play with balls, you know, like it's very sort of got this masculine connotation to it.
It's baked into the culture. I mean, that's what, even like people will flip their strings out, you know, at the tailpiece, and they'll be like, balls out. Oh,
yeah, right.
And I mean, I know it's just like juvenile locker room humor, but it's
it's not necessarily like harmful or damaging or like awful, but it is like, it's important to recognize that is part of the culture. And then when you recognize that, you realize that women who play bass are sort of like infiltrating that culture in some way. And it's hard because you have to find, like, if nothing changes in the way the culture is set up, right, then you just have like one woman, let's say, in a bass section of 8, and they either have to put up with it, or maybe they speak up and then they're sort of, everybody's being careful around them, and then everybody feels uncomfortable, or, you know, so there's this feeling that like you have to kind of battle or find your place in it. So you're always compromising. And the thing is too, that like men, you know, one of the things I talk about in my talk that I guess some of your listeners might listen to later.
Yeah, right.
So maybe I shouldn't be too repetitive.
Oh, no, please.
But yeah, is that there's something called hegemonic masculinity, which is essentially like society's ideal of what it means to be masculine. So I usually have people, I won't go into the whole thing, but I usually have people kind of yell out, you know, masculine characteristics or ideal masculine characteristics. And they often kind of match up with what we want from a bass player. You know, it's like strong, confident, loud, you know, these kinds of characteristics. And
well, it's interesting because really, like, strong, confident, loud, like those are like, you might want that in a violinist too, or something like that. But that predominance of men in, if we're looking at an orchestral setting or other settings, but if we just think about orchestral setting, I remember chatting with Nina DeCesar, who we both know, about this and about the conductor making an offhand remark. Oh, we really want someone, big and strong and
with masculine. It's like it was something like, it's not about gender, it's about how they play. And you're like, but you just used a gendered way to describe how they play. Yeah, I just reread her article this morning. It was so great. I'm really glad she wrote that because I certainly identified with it. And I think a lot of women bass players identified with it too. And it was just a nice, personal way of getting at a big issue. So appreciate that.
Do you think, just a slight sidetrack, but it's something that I've thought about a lot. Do you think I've played in many bass sections that are all guys, like most people have, or with one woman. I've also played with bass sections that are 50-50 or largely 50-50. Do you think there's a critical mass at which those sort of locker room tendencies vanish? I've wondered about that.
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I've never seen it, but I think it's like what you're saying. So it's possible, but I think, you said it's baked into the culture. I think that's totally true. So even, women who are trying to be good bass players are trying to sort of live up to these masculine standards. Oh yeah, that's where I was going with the last point. So this hegemonic masculinity thing, it's also damaging for men because you can never live up to this kind of ideal, and so then you're also having to compete and find your way in these sections where, or in life in general, but but it's hard for everybody having these kind of standards.
At what point, things that I've wondered, and it's interesting to chat, and thank you for doing this, by the way. I feel like it's a tremendous burden to ask represent all. I mean, not that I'm asking you to do this, but it's courageous. I just applaud you taking this on at ISB and these, but it is a big burden to be asked to represent all of womanhood in a sense in bass. And it's a similar thing if you talk to someone who's African American.
Yeah, totally.
Does anybody who's in some sort of a minority position.
Yeah, and I would like to say that I don't represent all women, and
of course.
Everybody has a different experience. I try to make that clear in my talks to you. But I'm trying to the way I'm approaching it is I'm trying to use both my personal experience, which kind of drove me to look into this more and do some research, and just a more global understanding, and I'm trying not to be accusatory and we must do this and we must do that and why don't you care about women, and I'm not doing that, and I don't feel that way. I just am trying to bring it, and that many other people are too, trying to bring it out so that we recognize what's going on. And if we acknowledge the way the culture is, that's a good step towards thinking about framing it a different way if we can.
One thing that has impressed me about Upton Bass ever since I got to know them was how many artists there are out there that are so satisfied with the work that Upton has done for them. Here's Mark Ramirez on his experiences having Upton copy his beautiful Cavani bass.
I do a lot of moving around and giving master classes and stuff like this. I had a copy made of it by the Uptons, by Gary and Eric Roy at the Upton shop. They made a copy of it, but they made an even smaller copy. I think it's a 7/8 copy of the bass. I use it now. I use that bass for my solo playing, which I do a lot. Recently, I've been doing a lot, especially here. And it has a detachable neck. The detachable neck, man, I tell you, in Europe, it's the craze.
Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, guys. This episode is brought to you by Robertson & Sons Violin Shop, and they have been serving the string community and the bass community for decades. Here's Don Robertson about the genesis of the Chromatic C extension. Were you the first to do that?
As far as I know, I did the first chromatic extension on Paul Ellison's bass.
Yeah.
We were up here several days, day and night, in a row to figure this thing out, and we came up with this swivel capo style, and I think Paul's was first, and Edgar Meyer was second one we did.
Learn more about their chromatic extensions, basses they've got in stock, and everything else that they do at robertsonviolins.com. Well, for you, growing up here in San Francisco and playing bass, what did you start on bass?
I played violin for a couple of years, and actually I hated it.
Okay, I played violin too and hated it too.
Yeah.
I was like, people ask me what I played, I would say second violin. 'Cause that's what I,
Totally.
When did you switch over?
Sixth grade.
Okay.
Actually, I was lucky because Barry Green actually would come to my middle school every other week, right from sixth grade, and that was part of the reason I wanted to play bass. Also, my best friend at the time, who's also named Megan, we both decided to play bass, so we were like the Megans for a while, and we heard that there was like this special bass coach who would come once a week and take us out of orchestra, and we got to play bass ensembles. So that was sort of part of the driving factor for me switching bass.
Now, I'm a
bass.
These gender roles, like you're just saying, they exist throughout society. So they're going to exist elementary school, middle school too.
Right.
But how was it being a female bass player at that young age? Did you feel like you were doing something that's just for boys, or did that thought cross your mind at that young age?
Yeah, interestingly, it was mostly girls who played bass.
Right. And it's interesting now, and I've wondered about that, and things that there's probably no clear answer, but most of my students here in San Francisco, these elementary, middle school students, 75% girls, at least.
Yeah, I think maybe that kind of started with Barry. He was pretty encouraging of girls to play bass. Or I don't know, maybe there's something in the water here, but I have found that the further I've gotten in my career, the other girls have dropped off a lot.
And
at every point.
Well, that's something that you talk about in your talk, and these numbers. If we just look at the professional orchestra world, do you analyze the ICSOM, International Conference of Symphony Orchestra Musicians? I think it's the top orchestras in the United States.
Right.
Let's say referred to as ICSOM orchestras. The percentage of women in those orchestras, and then the percentage of women in the leadership roles, principal or assistant principal. We don't have the numbers in front of us, but can you generally just...
Yeah, for bass players specifically, not in the orchestra as a whole, but the bass section, it's 8.3%.
8.3%.
The number. And, that was from a year ago, and I haven't updated it, but I haven't heard of other women winning auditions recently, but maybe I'm totally wrong, so... Please correct me if I am. But yeah, anyway, it wouldn't have changed significantly. 8.3% of professional highest level bass players are women. And most of the time they're not in leadership roles. There are a few, like Minnesota Orchestra has
Kristen
principal
Bouya and Kate Nettleman.
The top
awesome.
2 chairs. Yep. Yeah, so that's like a kind of anomaly that's pretty sweet, that sticks out. But anyway, I also like order them by pay, like highest pay to lowest pay in that level. And so that's how you can kind of see the economic impact of this, or the financial impact of this. Like Minnesota Orchestra is 8th on that list. And the top 7, I think there are a total of 2 or 3 women in the whole section.
Now, and it's interesting because of all the things that you can audition for or apply for, I mean, there's bias ever, but we have this standardized pretty much process, and people are behind a screen, and in other instruments that's resulted, not all instruments, but many, violin's a great example, in nearly parity, right? 50-50, maybe more women than men in several.
I think what is it, St. Louis Symphony. Last year they had more women than men for the first time, which is cool. Yeah, so that actually, it made it 50% more likely for women to get hired.
Okay.
The screen. Yeah.
So this process, if we just look at instrumentals in general, this process, we can be fairly confident that it's been successful, that we're well on our way to parity. Maybe not, at least in terms of that. So, but then we look at bass and we have these numbers and they're not getting any better, right? They're not getting better. Like if we look over the decades, the trend line, my wife's a radiologist, and we look at the trend line, and 30 years ago, I don't know the numbers exactly, I'm just making them up, but let's say 10% women in the profession. Now it's 50, right? Bass, it's 8%, and it was 8%.
Yeah. It was probably lower. Maybe it got higher at some point and then came back down.
Yeah, in fact, and Ira Gold helped to organize about 20 female bass players from internationally, really. And I was fortunate enough to be a fly on the wall and listen to this. And my recollection is that, if anything, it's gone down, was the consensus.
Right.
And so why is it? So you're growing up here in San Francisco, mostly women, that female bass players. Then that number narrows, or for your experience, it narrows. Where did it narrow and why?
I think at first, it narrows a little bit at every step. So like in middle school and high school, I think my senior year of high school, I'm not sure if I'm getting this right. We had all women. And one of the years I was in high school, it was like only girls in the bass section, which was sort of, but everybody thought that was funny. Like it was like a weird thing. Right. Yeah. But, and then I went to college, and it was me and maybe one or two other women, at UC Santa Cruz with Barry. And so I was still with Barry Green, so that might have affected it in a way. And then when I went to San Francisco Conservatory for my master's, I was the only girl. And since then, I think after I graduated, they were half and half one year. But when I was there, I was the only woman. And then I guess in my professional life around here, freelancing in all of the orchestras, there are a few, very few.
Well under half.
Yeah. It's probably 10% or something.
Right. And I'd say those numbers are similar in Chicago. I played in the Elgin Symphony. Sue Sullivan, shout out to Sue. I know you occasionally listen to the podcast. Sue's been in the Elgin Symphony for quite some time. Kate Nettleman was also in the section. So 2 of the 6 of us and several subs are female. But if you look at Chicago as a whole, definitely 10 to 20%, let's say. So is it... And this is a topic that came up at that conversation with this global population of female bass players that were there. And so if we just speak about bass and we look at who's winning jobs in professional orchestras, you can trace it back to probably about 4 or 5 schools. Somebody's had some association with. At the time of recording right now, Curtis, Rice, USC, couple
BU,
others.
maybe.
BU, Indiana, right. There's a list, let's say 5 to 10 schools. And so where are women falling out of love with the profession? Where are women not pursuing it? Where are they being driven out? Like, I wonder where is it the high school to college transition? Is it the undergrad to graduate transition? Is it like where in that link?
I don't know. I think that's a great question. It would be worth really deeply investigating that. But if you think of, or if you compare it to, I think it's engineering, that field is also, it's very similar. Yeah. And what they found, they did this study a couple of years ago where they tested whether or not having a woman mentor was an important factor And what they found was that some of the women in the study had no mentor, some had a male mentor, and some had a female mentor. And the women who had no mentor in this study were the least likely to pursue a career in the field. So this is graduate students, people at the graduate level of engineering. They're getting like doctorates in engineering, and they just go like, oh, this isn't for me. I got to switch. The people with male mentors, it could go either way. And the people with female mentors were the most likely to continue to pursue their career. And so there's something to, a couple of aspects of it. There's the feeling of I belong here because I see somebody else who looks like me, who I see myself in, doing this thing. Therefore, I can do it. And if you don't see yourself doing the thing, or especially like winning the audition or being the principal, if we're just still talking about orchestras, which we could talk about all kinds of levels of bass playing, jazz, and solo and whatever, but if you don't see anybody else doing it, then you're less likely, like you might still do it, but you can feel defeated more easily. You thinking I don't belong here. And then there's a person who has connections that you can sort of have as a mentor, who can introduce you to people, who can promote you, and who can like keep encouraging you to pursue what you're pursuing. And if you don't have that, it's much harder.
Yeah, it's like my mind goes to the 4-minute mile, which was an impossibility. Then one person breaks it, and then people see the possibility, and then everybody. And you were one of the most wonderful pedagogues and players of the last 50 years. Certainly, Diana Gannett, and one of the few women teaching at a university of the stature of University of Michigan or University of Iowa before that. So you had that mentor, and so the fact that we have so few women in those positions at all. We have Jacqueline Pickett, shout out to her in Georgia, and a few other people. I mean, we don't have a Orrin O'Brien teaching at Manhattan.
Of course.
We have some examples, but we don't have many. And then we have in academia a shrinking of these jobs in general.
Right.
So it's really getting those mentors is an incredible challenge for a woman. Yeah. If we're thinking of their professor, in an academic setting.
Right.
What was your experience having Diana as a mentor? And again, this is a tremendous topic, but,
right. Oh,
what did
was
that
great.
do for you? Why did you seek her out? What do you think? How do you see the importance of working with a woman in a setting like that?
Well, I think, Diana was incredible to work with, but in general, and I think that having a woman as a teacher was like, as a private bass teacher, was sort of a novelty for me. I don't think I'd even taken a lesson with a woman, now that I think about it, before her. And maybe Kristen Corbett at Bass Camp a long time ago. But but yeah, Diana, I think studying with her made me see that like there was this sort of different kind of relationship, having a woman mentor and having a male mentor, because we could sort of connect in a way that I couldn't, I think, with male teachers, and not to say that they weren't great teachers, they definitely were, but there's just sort of something different about it. And I think that's when I really started opening my eyes to this whole topic. Like I had thought about it. I recognized that I was the only woman, but I don't think I had really analyzed my behavior in reaction to it, or other people's reaction to me, as being like something that could maybe change, or maybe something that shouldn't be the way it was. Like I think I just accepted it, and maybe took a little bit of pride in being like, oh, I'm like the cool bass chick, like, and not that there's anything totally wrong with that, but maybe it doesn't have to be such a novelty thing. And having Diana as a mentor definitely influenced my ability to see it, I think.
Yeah. Thinking about culture and here in San Francisco and just south of us, Silicon Valley, and this whole culture, the world of tech has a reputation, well deserved right now, of being pretty inhospitable to women. And even when not that women, and it's the term used is bro-y culture.
Right.
And you look at Uber and all the fiascos they've had,
right.
and many other companies, and not that women are necessarily being discriminated against in the hiring process, but when they get in there, they find the culture distasteful. It's maybe frat-like or juvenile or this. And so I've read a lot about this. I just find it interesting. And a lot of women just leave the profession for other things because they just, even though they're there, Google's reaching out to hire more and more women. Facebook, one of the, Sheryl Sandberg is one, one top management there. But still, people leave women are leaving the tech world because they find it distasteful. And I can't help but think about base and thinking back to my experiences there was one woman at Northwestern in the base section my whole time there. While I was teaching at DePaul, there were, in 9 years, there were maybe two female students. And, you go into the base room and everybody's, it's like the locker
crap
room.
is everywhere.
Everybody's pants and shirts are everywhere. And then it's the changing room. And then the girl comes in and it's awkward.
Yeah.
And it is that when you get a whole bunch of guys together, and especially a bunch of 18-year-old guys, it's not that far from a high school locker room, right? So surely that must contribute to women not wanting to just I don't want to. Do I really want this for my future for the next 30 years?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's all these, like you brought up the screened auditions earlier. There are all of these factors besides just playing behind the screen that are involved. So yeah, there's that kind of culture. Like, do I want to be part of this culture? There's, not seeing yourself, and feeling like, in Nina's, article, she talked about this thought that she had of, that would be awkward if I won principal, because then, I'd be this 22-year-old girl, like, bossing all of these older men around or whatever. And I totally understand that feeling. Yeah. And I think a lot of women do. And I think it can be distracting when you're auditioning or when you're even practicing. Like, if you're thinking about practicing for an audition and you go, like, I probably shouldn't win. Like, are you going to win? Like,
exactly. That's such a great point, because talking to all these people that have won auditions, and it's all about mindset. It's all about being true to yourself and believe. And if you have that doubt anywhere, and I've had that doubt about my own, if you have that doubt and you have that added doubt because of what we're talking about, that's such a great point.
Yeah, totally. So and then a lot of orchestras also take the screen down for the last round. Which I don't understand, exactly. That kind of defeats the purpose. And, I'd love to hear an argument the other way, but I do think that, that could contribute to it. And then, like you said, once you get in to the orchestra, there's the culture to contend with. So there's a lot of other factors.
Well, it's a huge topic.
We could talk forever about
Well, and so we've got all ages. I just forwarded you a couple emails. Somebody who's in 6th grade listening to this, right?
Right.
And then we've got people who are adult amateurs in their 70s, and we've got everybody in between. So so people are listening. This is an issue. If you don't know it's an issue, just go online and look a little bit, or watch the news one day. You'll see this is a tremendous issue.
Yeah.
And one thing that D'Addario strings specialist Lyris Hung gets asked a lot is, how can you keep your strings in better playing condition? Here are her thoughts.
I get a lot of this question. People often ask me, I don't want to spend a lot of money. What can I do? And I mean, my answer is unfortunately really, really simple. And that's just to clean your strings, to keep your strings really clean. And a lot of people, moan and at that, because they clean their strings. Most people will clean their strings, but not often enough.
There you go. Simple, huh? Keep that cloth handy and wipe down those strings after each use. Thanks to Dario for sponsoring the podcast. And so let's maybe take the younger folks, the people, the teenagers, the people that are going to college right now, maybe starting their undergrad. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could start with the men, the guys. What should they be aware of? What can they do? I'm sure most people's intention isn't to make women feel unwelcome.
Right.
What are some things that they can do to improve the situation?
Yeah, so great question. I think that the best place to start is to recognize. So I was just thinking earlier about how it's kind of like practicing, right? So Scott Pingel, when I studied with him, had this sort of formula. I'm not sure where he got it. He didn't make it up, but where you have like a 4-step process. It's unconscious, incorrect, conscious, incorrect, conscious, correct, and unconscious, correct.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of the same thing with this stuff. Like, we're walking around not aware that we might be causing other people problems, or that we might be contributing to, we're not the cause of it, but, we might be contributing to a larger problem without any awareness. And then once you bring awareness to it, you're like, you see it everywhere, and you'll know. Like, I think, like, once you start to recognize the way we interact with each other, and you start to think about it consciously and not just like reacting subconsciously, you really start to see how you could do better. And so it's just a matter of, like, not making a big deal about people being a woman, or, you can always ask the person, so, I mean, maybe they won't like to be asked, but I think that's still better. I think it's still better to just say, like, oh, like, just talk to them. To them. Say, how do you feel in this section? Like, is there anything I can do? People appreciate that kind of thing. And, I think some people maybe don't want to be singled out. But I think that is more, I don't want to overgeneralize, because I could be wrong on this, but I think, we were just talking the other day that's more of a kind of, there's a different mentality in the sort of older generation of women, I think, in the base world. And it's totally 100% understandable, and I totally get it. It's like, you don't want to be known for being a woman. You just want to be known for your work.
Right. You don't want to be singled out. You're singled out enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like, because you're trying to avoid tokenism.
Yeah.
Because there's this thing where if you are the first woman, or a woman who does something that women don't typically do, there's this worry that people will think, and it's founded because people do think this sometimes, that you got where you are because you're a woman, that like somebody was trying to like look diverse or something, right, and they gave you that opportunity because you're a woman. So you don't want to be singled out in that way. And it totally makes sense. But then, like I said, once you start like investigating gender in society, you realize that like you really can't separate it. Like it's not a separate thing for men or for women. We just tend to see men as more neutral and less gendered, right? Like when you hear the word gender, you think of women. But anyway, that's sort of a whole other tangent to go on. And so for younger people, I think we're already seeing a big change.
Yeah, that's. I think you're right.
Yeah, there's more awareness in general. So I think just being aware and opening your eyes and talking to people of other genders and keeping an open dialogue.
Well, and for women, whether they're teenagers or they're undergrads and they're getting fed up with what we've been talking about.
Right.
Whether it's the dirty shirts hanging on the bass rack or whether it's the balls out jokes or whatever, like, what advice might you have for, because you've stuck with it.
Right.
And even though you've seen the percentage of women narrow from growing up in San Francisco to what you're doing now, and you're doing super interesting things now, by the way.
Thanks.
I'll mention in the intro, but Megan's living in Buffalo currently and finished her doctorate at Michigan and is
I've got a duo, with another woman bassist called Shade and Light.
Yeah.
Shadeandlight.org.
There we go. It's all about the shout out.
Gonna do a plug.
And playing Scodnibio and all sorts of modern music. So you're really exploring. Yeah,
and part of that, is I am sort of moving away from the orchestral path. Mm-hmm. And I think that gender is part of it. But what's nice for me about sort of doing the duo with Betsy, so it's a duo with Betsy Sukup, who's amazing, by the way. We get to do programs that we create. So, our first concert, so we just kind of debuted. Our first concerts were about women's mental health. Yeah, so we sort of we read some poems. We read this clip from the 1950s about how to be a good wife, and we each wrote a piece. In my piece, I had some electronics and I manipulated some laughter, and I laughed on stage and stuff, and it was like and it was this kind of hysteria thing, like about women's hysteria. And also Joelle Leander was a big influence. I played a Chelsea piece that she played where there's like screaming in it. It's a piece that I was kind of obsessed with for a long time. Wow. Because it's really terrifying. But yeah, so being able to kind of do those things, I can kind of bring like, my thoughts about gender and my frustrations with like the world of bass and the world, not just of bass, but overall, like out in a creative way. That outlet has helped me, but I still think that like, we can sort of change the orchestra culture to be more hospitable to women. Even though I kind of stepped a little bit aside from
what's interesting, and do you a name that comes to mind, a bass player in the Austin Symphony, and she does so much more than that, and someone also in academia, Jessica Valls.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you're familiar with Jessica, but she's really exploring contemporary music and theatrical pieces and that sort of thing.
Oh, cool.
When did you get into that? And I'm just curious if Barry Green had any influence, or if that was something after that, because Barry obviously explores all kinds of projects. When did you start to explore these things outside of the orchestral box?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's interesting you say that, because I think that studying with Barry at UC Santa Cruz, I was sort of thinking outside of the orchestral box. But then when I decided to pursue bass as a career, the sort of orchestra path was like, oh, well, that makes sense. You can get a job. And, it seemed like a reasonable way to go. And I liked playing in orchestra. I've always enjoyed it. And then I went to the conservatory specifically for that purpose in San Francisco. And studying with Scott, it was very like driven towards like an orchestral path. And then somewhere I think hit a middle point where I was like, okay, now I've like really like crunched on my technique. I was for 4 years freelancing before I went back to school, and I was starting to get bored, I think. Or not bored, but like I needed some more creative stimulation, I think, in terms of my performance.
Well,
Anyway.
I couldn't identify more with that feeling, by the way, because I had that in Chicago. I felt like I was being ground into a soulless snub. This driver who like occasionally pulled the bass out in between shoveling the car out and sitting in traffic.
Your real job was driving.
Yeah, and you seem so inspired by what you're doing now, and sure, of course, I think something that people who haven't had the experience you had might not realize is the incredible technical skill it takes to play Scodinibio or what Mark Dresser does, for example.
Oh, yeah.
If people aren't familiar with Mark Dresser's music, go look up Mark on YouTube or Google him right now and check him out. He is one of the most phenomenal technical bass players.
Totally.
So surely you couldn't be doing what you're doing with Betsy or what I heard you play last night without that technical foundation that you had.
Right.
It's not an either I will bust my chops or I'm going to go explore modern music.
Right.
I will bust my chops.
Yes.
And then I will go.
And then I'll also try to do something that is inspiring to me.
Yeah.
There's some people, orchestral playing is incredibly inspiring, and that's amazing too. So
And if
I'm
that's
not knocking the orchestra.
Yeah, and I really do think that there are some people that really is their calling.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's a lack of. I think that there's some people they wake up eating, breathing, sleeping, works by Beethoven, Mahler, Strauss, or modern orchestral music, and they're even though it's easier to get on network TV than to get a bass job, probably.
Right.
If we look at it, there are possibilities, both playing bass and otherwise, to live fully in that world. So go for it. But I just applaud the direction you're going.
Oh, thanks.
And I can't wait to see you. You've got lots of career ahead of you.
Yeah.
But if lots of young people listen to this, if we just narrow it to young female bass players who are thinking about a career in music and are thinking about a college and finding a college and again we have so many directions we could go, with college and the rising cost of that, whatever. But let's just say, talk to the young women listening to this right now about looking for a school, maybe given what we've been talking about here.
Diana just retired, so
I know exactly.
Michigan isn't there, but I think that, and this is true for everybody, finding a teacher that works for you. I would say try to seek out a teacher who you feel really comfortable with in every way, not just like, oh, they're going to help me technically, but someone who you'll feel supported by. And I don't know, I don't want to just start naming names, but I think like it's going to be very individual for different young women looking into a career. But you want to definitely, and even if you don't have that in your private teacher, reach out to women in particular, but even other men who are very supportive of women. I know Paul Ellison has talked a lot about supporting women in his studio. I know Donovan Stokes has a lot of women in his studio, and his wife Inez is wonderful, and I'm sure she could be a very helpful support in addition to Donovan. He's at Shenandoah. So those are good ones. I'm sure there are lots of other ones, and I'm gonna if I try to name more, I'm gonna leave a lot of people out.
Impossible.
But, but I think finding a teacher that you can even talk openly, if that's something you want to do, about gender and about how you feel, and someone that's going to support you and not kind of just leave you to the wolves to be devoured or whatever.
Which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And unconsciously maybe, but
no, totally unconsciously, and not on purpose necessarily. Or maybe they do and they think you're going to be better for it. Yeah. No, maybe they really think that's a great thing to do, and maybe that's what you need. Some women might want that to just be thrown in, but at least for me, and I think for many other women, it's really helpful to have a strong support from your teacher. That's not just for bass, but for like how you're doing and your career path.
What would you tell, if anything, Megan about to go off to UC Santa Cruz? Okay, so you're still in the San Francisco school, studying with Barry, going to go work more with Barry at Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
You've done all the things you've done. You've had the experience you've had, and I applaud what you're doing, and I can't wait. We got to do a round 2 and 3 and 4. So this is not the last time we'll talk, but
okay.
What would you tell young Megan?
It's funny. Like, I didn't go to Santa Cruz to study music. I didn't know I was going to. I knew I was going to keep taking lessons, but I decided to major in music a little bit later. So I think I would have started earlier and practiced more. I said you should practice more your first year.
Did you miss it when you got there? Were you doing less music when you got there? And you just what made you go that direction?
I played in the orchestra. And I took lessons, and I played in the bass ensemble because we had a bass ensemble. And yeah, I think I just realized like, oh, this is the thing that I always want to do. Yeah. Like all my other classes, I'm like, okay, like this is fine. But with music, I just like kept going back. Yep. I kept wanting to go back. I was like, oh, I get to go to orchestra now instead of. I think a
lot of us can identify with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's not good advice though, because I think I caught up a little bit. I think I would tell myself to seek out a mentor, like we were just talking about, who is a woman, because confidence issues are a huge part of all of our journeys, I think, as musicians, and mine for sure. To just kind of help build my confidence and just help build my confidence.
Well, I think it's easier, like you were mentioning, easier than ever to reach out to people. Diana Gannett is online and is this giving person. Inez,
everybody emailed Diana.
A lot of
Splutter inbox. Sorry, Diana.
Megan, pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason.
Megan, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, I really hope you enjoyed this and got something out of this episode. Such an important topic. And like I said while we were talking, just applaud Megan for taking this on. You can learn more about her at her website, meganmcdevitt.wordpress.com. We've got that linked up. We've got the duo that she's in linked up, all that good stuff. So thanks, Megan, and thank you for listening. If you want to reach out to me, feedback@contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so. There's so many ways to do it, and contrabassconversations.com/subscribe will get you all those options. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring, and Mitch makes and services bases in the Dallas area, just east of Dallas. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. Thank you also to Krista Copper for archiving and cataloging all of these episodes. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.